It's time for our weekly ad. The Beyond Solitaire podcast is proudly sponsored by Central Michigan University's Center for Learning Through Games and Simulations. They've got some great stuff going on, starting with their booth at Gen Con. Please give them a visit at booth 6005 on the second floor near the Hyatt Skywalk, not too far from Paizo. You should also consider signing up for Damon Stone's game design class, which is being offered as part of CMU's Certificate in Applied Game Design. It's going to be amazing, and there will be a link in the show notes. Damon is actually on the pod this week, so keep listening for a taste of just how much you can learn from him. On that note, let's get on with the show.
Hey gamers, this is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire, and I'm back on the pod with two very special guests this week. I have got game designer Ted Torgerson and game designer Damon Stone here to talk to us about Free at Last. So, gentlemen, why don't we just start right at the beginning with the basics? Let's get a rundown of Free at Last and what it's about.
Damon?
Hey, so Free at Last is a semi-cooperative / cooperative game. It has two modes of play, dealing with the struggles during the civil rights movement. Ted created this fantastic design, and I got brought in to add a little bit more value and, run the wheels and everything. And I really enjoy it. I think it is a great game.
Oh, that's fantastic. So yeah, let's just probe that a little bit. So Ted, this is originally your idea. When did you come up with it, and how long has it been gestating?
Well, I made a game in 2006, I think, regarding the civil rights movement. It was a two-player game where one player was the civil rights movement and the other player was the segregationist. And then I was approached some time ago by a company that was looking for a cooperative game where the segregationist side would be abstracted out and the players would be the civil rights movement, working cooperatively, but at the same time trying to be the most important group in the civil rights movement, gaining the most fame or victory points or prestige. So I think I started the game about 2 years ago. I think it was at the beginning of the pandemic, I think, that the company contacted me. And then I spent about a year doing research and outlining the game. My version of the game was completed around, I think, Damon, around December you came in.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a design process there, very limited feedback, but very helpful. And I knew I needed more help. So Damon agreed to come in and put the polish on the thing and add a lot of ideas as well. So yeah, it was a long research project and a very short design development process in my hands.
Interesting. And then Damon, what was your role in the completion of the game then?
I would say that it was the majority of what I did was development with a slight amount of design. The game, let me put it this way, the civil rights movement was long and very deep. It took place all over the country, although the vast majority of it was focused in the American South. There were thousands of people that were involved at all of these different levels, and any game that is looking to try and present a meaningful snapshot of that history is going to require a lot of moving parts. And so my job was to come in and make it so that the game was accessible for people who are not super hardcore gamers who are looking at a 3 to 5 hour commitment as like just a great regular Sunday afternoon. And the design aspects that I did were mostly refinements, taking some ideas that Ted had and putting a stronger focus on rather than A and B, and then taking B and sort of incorporating it into another aspect. So B and C are now just B, and they're sort of brought in together. But a lot of it was really just a case of trying to make it so that this thing that Ted and I are both super passionate about, we believe is an incredibly important subject that not nearly enough people know about, and make it something that you could sit down and play with friends or family who are not necessarily heavy gamers, but might be intrigued by the concept, the theme, and would be able to play the game and walk away having had fun and feeling like they've learned some things. And I think a lot of what we tend to in the American school system learn about the civil rights movement is focused on a very small handful of players, people who were big names and either the figureheads or the leaders of specific organizations. And it doesn't tell a lot about the people who supported them. It doesn't say a lot about the people who were the boots on the ground, the ones who were actually being impacted by the various laws and social mores. And so Ted's game really focused on what I like to call like street level. Like if you think about like superheroes, you have like, oh, we're the Avengers, Earth's mightiest heroes. And then you have like Spider-Man, your friendly neighborhood hero. There are those people who are in the streets, who are sitting at those lunch counters and getting hot coffee and milkshakes poured on them. There are the people who are peacefully marching down a city street and getting fire hoses turned on them, which are so powerful as to like abrade skin, knock people over, cause concussions. Like a lot of people don't know who they are. They don't know their names. They don't know what they went by. They didn't know their struggles. And this game does a really good job of highlighting a lot of that.
So this actually leads me to a question I had, which is, so this is a really serious subject matter about a really intense time in our history, but it's also meant to be a game that's very accessible and that people can just have fun playing on a Sunday afternoon. So how do you balance between historical seriousness and treating the topic with the gravity that it requires, but also, I mean, it's a game. How do you also make sure that it's a good time?
You want to take that one first, or
I can touch.
I'm coming from a perspective of a war game. So war gamers have a lot of fun on serious topics all the time. It isn't a question of it's too serious to have fun, but of course, part of the fun of the game is to learn about these people that you haven't heard about before. Each of the project cards has a local figure on it. I will say there are 55 cards, there are probably 50 of them that people won't have heard of before. And then when you take the time to find out about them, you see they were very important figures in their community. So there's a lot of fun in learning about the people that Damon mentioned that people hadn't heard about before. And part of the fun is winning the game. So it's a competitive game, beat the other guy. It's not that, so I think there's plenty of room to take the topic seriously and still have people compete against one another and thereby have a good time when they win.
Yeah, I would definitely say that it's very possible to take a very heavy subject, a very serious and weighty period of history or event, and gamify it so that the playing of the game is enjoyable. Like, can I say that every moment of my design and development work was fun and a good time? No. There are enough instances where, I can't obviously speak for Ted, but going through and for the images that were used for the like the challenge cards, and some of the images for the projects. Like there's just looking at these angry, screaming faces and recognizing that, oh, yep, that person has that face because of someone who looks like me, and for no other reason than they look like me fundamentally. And so there is, that sort of like psychic weight, a tax that comes. But for me, playing the game, the fun comes in working with other people to defeat segregation, to remove the resistances, the systemic and social resistances that are preventing, the adoption of equity and equality, and seeing these victories rack up is enjoyable. It's like, yes, we are doing our job well. And Ted mentioned that, beating the other guy is generally fun. And so when you're playing it on that, semi cooperative or semi-competitive, depending on which way you want to look at it, there is that edge to it. Because if the four of us are sitting down, we're each representing a different organization, and we're all working towards the same overall goal. And I can't let either of your organizations completely fail, because that would cause a collapse of the movement. So I need to find opportunities to aid you, but I can't do it at the expense of my own organization's ideals, priorities, my own projects. So it is a balancing act, which in itself is pretty fun. When you play it from a cooperative level, it removes that element from it. And then the fun comes mostly from hey, we're banding together against, for the lack of a better word, capital E evil. And there's something fun about being both the good guy and the underdog, and to be able to, again, for lack of a better phrase, stick it to the man, and know that each thing that you're doing, the figures involved are real people, and that these abstractions have some weight, and to know that, for the most part, they succeeded. The various projects that are represented in the game created positive movement, even when a given project itself in the real world did not succeed at its goals. It was still able to create movement and inertia towards, the passing of the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act.
So I love these two answers, and Damon, you already started to kind of poke at what I was gonna go with. I love that this game can basically go either way. You can focus on trying to beat another player, or you can focus on banding together to beat the system. And either way, like, the system's kind of there. So between the semi-cooperative and cooperative modes of this game, what was taken out, and then how mechanically did you represent, I guess, both things, the semi-cooperative competitive vibe and just pure cooperation? Like, what kinds of things can you do in the game, and what are their historical ties to make it work both ways?
I think maybe we start with Ted talking about what the cooperative, what the competitive nature in the game is based on, because a lot of people think that, like, oh, like, everybody just got along and had the exact same goals and priorities, and they sang Kumbaya as they marched together on Washington, and that's not the way that it happened.
Not exactly. Okay, so each of the organizations, as organizations naturally are, there's loyalty to the organization by its leaders. particularly at the NAACP, which at that time was 50 years old, had 400,000 members, dues-paying members, and was the acknowledged leader of the civil rights movement going back, before the Brown case, to its founding. And it views the other organizations, particularly CORE, as startup, or what's the right word, that they're
Upstarts.
Upstarts. Thank you. Not startups. Startups are different.
I mean, that's
upstarts that are coming in on their turf and raising money off of, that could have gone to them, taking away members, taking away media attention. All these organizations rely on funding, not so much the NAACP, which was largely funded by Black people joining memberships, but SCLC and SNCC and CORE really relied on media attention in order to generate fundraising to run their project. So, and there's also a great deal of ego involved, depending on which person you're talking about. Not so much Martin Luther King, but Roy Wilkins and Jim Farmer, the other leaders, are very interested in being seen as on par with him or being the principal leader. So behind the scenes, there is a fair amount of, I wouldn't say backbiting, but competition and trying to outshine the other groups. And that's all the game is. You're never, at least I don't remember, Damon, an event where you can block another player or prevent his success. You're always taking advantage to try to help, but at the same time gaining attention through your aid. So it's competitive, but not what's the gaming word where you can block somebody?
There is a very specific word. But yeah, it's not conflict. There's no real conflict.
Yeah, it's indirect. Any competition is indirect, not direct conflict.
Interesting. So it's about who can help the best, basically.
Right, or who can come in after all the work's been done and give the speech and get all the TV cameras. That's
and there's definitely those moments where, on that semi-coop side where, and to be clear, the reason why I'm referring to it as semi-cooperative is because if you do too poorly, the game is over. And so Ted and I would have to ensure that you don't out and out just fail. Like we might not necessarily want you to succeed more than us, but we can't let you fail. We can't let the segregationists win. And so we are all trying to accomplish the same thing. It's just that, again, the person who is doing the most, or at least making the right choices when someone else is doing something really well, is going to come back at the end of the game and account for victory points. Can you restate what your question was?
What is taken out when you play completely purely cooperative?
Right. So from a rules perspective, very little. There's a scoring mechanic where each organization has a certain amount of influence that they've gained in different areas, and that's tracked by the resistance that they have reduced on the systemic and on the social realms, which are blue cubes and white cubes. And the more commitment that I have that has managed to make it through the end and successful completion of one of my projects, that is also scored. And at the end of the round, whoever has the most has had the most influence against social, against commitment, or for commitment, and against systemic is going to get points. And they're going to get 1 point for each player that they had more success, more influence than. So it keeps the game really tight. If there's 4 of us and I take first in my influence against systemic racism, then the most points that I can get from that is 3. And so even if I did this much and Liz, you did that much and Ted did that much, I still only get 3, right? Or I should say in this case 2, because there's 4 of us. You would get 1 and Ted didn't beat anybody in influence, so Ted gets 0. But if Ted wins the other 2, then Ted's walking away with more points out of that. And so it keeps it really tight. It's always just about how we are in relation to each other in our successes. So even if, I have taken, a low placement multiple times in a row, you're never that far away. There are other ways of me gaining victory points that can accumulate in a larger fashion that can make up for those differences. So it stays competitive pretty much throughout. That particular element does not exist because we are not purposely trying to keep track of who's had just the greatest influence and therefore it made the most impact. In the competitive version, whoever has the most impact at the end of the game wins. History notes them as being, the face and the mover and shaker when it comes down to the civil rights movement, and everybody else is sort of oh yeah, and Damon was there. But in the actual gameplay aspect, there are no changes. It's just how points are accumulated, because there's still elements, particularly in campaign mode, where if we're playing cooperatively, we are trying to gain enough support, enough commitment that we can do the March on Washington, which sort of in the campaign game triggers the end game. Now we have to get our, the civil rights bill and the voter rights bill passed, and that's where it all sort of like comes to a head, everything that we've been working up to. And it's still possible for us to fail. We could have won successfully everywhere else, but if we can't get our ducks in a row for this part, this one that creates this federal legislation rather than changing individual state laws or trying to get Supreme Court rulings in our favor, like this is going to be the one that codifies it into law. So gameplay, there's nothing really that's taken out.
So all this talk of semi-cooperative, cooperative also leads to the next question. So I know that technically this game can be played solo. However, the BGG description lists it as for 2 to 6 players. So what is the reality of playing this game solo? Like, is it really meant to be a cooperative game and you could just make yourself cooperate with yourself? Or is there a solo mode that's kind of incoming?
I would say that the game is inherently playable as a solo game. It is at turns more difficult or really easy to play as if you're playing just one single faction. Most of it scales based on the number of players that you have. But if you're playing by yourself, it's just you. You don't have to fight anybody to determine by fight. I mean, the closest thing in this game to, like direct impact in a negative fashion is there is a point where the projects are laid out and the organizations, the players are choosing which projects they're going to take on for that round. And if the cards that I have in my hand and the way that I'm sort of like geared towards, none of those projects are available. There's no voter registration projects available. And my hand right now is really strong for voter registration. Or there's one voter registration and Ted takes that project, then I just kind of have to make do. I may also find myself, and Ted and you may find yourselves with me struggling and having to help in ways that you weren't necessarily intending on it, which, again, if I fail 2 projects, we all lose. So maybe you go like, okay, well, it's your first project. I'm sure it'll be fine. But that means that, for the rest of the game, you need to make sure that I don't fail again. So in a solo context, you get what you get. There are 2 projects out there because there's always one more than there are the number of players. And if neither of those works for you, there's no one to help you. It is just you. And so when the randomness becomes more impactful. So I would suggest anybody that wants to play it solo, that they take on the role of 2 factions and then play it full competitive mode. It will be more interesting, more fun that way, I believe. But if you really like feast or famine experiences, playing it solo can be very interesting. I actually think from an educational standpoint, it can teach a fair amount about how important it is to have a network, to have colleagues, even if you are not necessarily friends with them. That ability to call up the NAACP and say like, so that that march that we were doing, well, we have about 100 people that are in jail and we could really use some bail money right now, which is the thing that happens. Like actually happened a couple of times, and more than a couple of times. So, and there's at least one instance where the NAACP said, yeah, that's not going to happen. We told you not to do that thing. And predictably, you got a bunch of people and they got arrested, but we need this money because we're going to court next month. And we have to have this money because this is not about one town and, some unfairness or even one state. If we can get this law declared unconstitutional, it's all 50 states. Like it's entire union. So yeah. So it's entirely possible to play as one player. It is feast or famine. If you got the right cards, and you're going to do great. If you don't have the right cards, you're really going to struggle. And it shows the importance of colleagues, of working together.
Damon, I wonder how the challenge deck would work when you've only got one player. And maybe
not in your favor.
Maybe you'll have to deal 6 and pick 3. Pick your poison. It's going to be really tough.
Yeah. Once you move, so the challenge deck is a deck that is intended to play once the players have a good grasp of the game and both the mechanics and strategies. I wouldn't personally recommend it for somebody in their first go through because it creates some really, really bad circumstances. And if you don't have, if you aren't ready for it, if you don't know how to strategize around it, if you don't know the game well enough, it can be like, oh, I got these 2 cards and that made me fail one project right up front. And, a turn later, here's another one and it's really not looking good for me. So challenge deck in a solo player game, I think Ted is right. I think playing multiple of them or dealing out multiple of them and selecting 2, is the way to go. If you want to go so that it's difficult but not impossible, it's like, I will deal 4, I will choose 1, I'll shuffle the other 3 and then deal 1 at random. And then, something along those lines so that you have some minor amount of control. But yeah, the challenge deck makes the game, I think, have a lot of replayability because the challenge cards come out and the deck is large enough that you will never see every card in multiple gameplays in a row. Even during you played the campaign a couple of times, you probably won't see all of them, and you certainly won't see them in the same combination. And those combinations matter when one thing comes up and then another thing comes up and it hits you in a completely different area. One area that you may have, like, if I get rid of some of this so that I can focus more on here, then I'm in a really good spot. Great, I defeated this challenge, or I met this challenge, and now this other thing's hit up and I no longer have the cards to deal with that, and now I'm scrambling. It creates really interesting dynamic, and it's one of my favorite aspects. One of two. Well, it's all my favorite aspects. Ted had a lot of brilliance in there, but my two absolute favorite things, it's one of them.
That's awesome. So as we've talked about real events that happened, about projects, and I kind of want to circle back to something that you both mentioned earlier on in our conversation, which is that a lot of the things that appear in this game are people, events, organizations that maybe not everybody has heard of, but who were important in the civil rights movement. So I guess, how did you select who would make it into the game? And then did you have to make any deep cuts that broke your heart because you had to live it? Who got to come in?
This is for me because I did the project deck, right? Damon, you left the projects. They're all the same people.
Yep.
And
I mean, the project and the leaders.
And the leaders too. All right. So my basic research, I mean, I read a few books, of course, but the source of the game was the Afro-American newspaper archives, which are available from Google Archives from 1960 to 65. And you catch stories that catch your eye, and they're in the paper day after day, and the photographs, and you start to see these are storylines that are compelling and interesting people. And yes, there were some projects that we had to leave out of the game, in part because of the positional aspect of the game, which is very limited. You really can't have multiple projects going in the same state. You're going to have a project in Louisiana, another one in Alabama, Mississippi and Alabama. For instance, Project C, which is the Birmingham confrontation, so famous, sort of the peak of the direct action in the history of the civil rights movement. You have a voting drive in Jefferson County. You've got the school integration. You've got boycotting the downtown stores, marches, the children's marches, all going on in this a few square mile radius. You've got to sort of set up your scenarios so that you can fit in as much as you can, and then some things just have to be left out. I remember we added the Petersburg sit-ins, which is one of the biggest projects, maybe the project that was the sample, or what's the right word, I don't know, paradigm example that they use going forward after the sit-ins faded out in 61. The Petersburg sit-ins organizational system. Wyatt Walker, who was the leader of it, became the executive director of the SCLC. But that only made it in the game because we needed a Virginia project to balance out the projects that were going on in the Deep South and so on. So I can't think of it off the top of my head, but I know that there were a number of school projects that we didn't put in. We had one for each state, it seems to me. Mm-hmm. And of course, we didn't include any projects outside our time frame. I told Damon that he has to do an expansion for the 1950s to do the Montgomery bus boycotts and the Little Rock school crisis and all that stuff. So there was a temporal issue with regard to going beyond the Voting Rights Act. We didn't include anything. Well, we did Lowndes County, which is at the end of 65. But pretty much we were going to begin with the Greensboro project, the sit-ins in February of 60, and end with the Voting Rights Act. And then we were going to try to do one project per state per scenario, and the scenarios are 4, 5, or usually 6, right? 6 projects per. And then, so those were the limitations. And then when you read the newspaper, of course, you're not getting a full perspective. You're getting an immediacy and a granularity where you really get to see the names and places that are going on. But There are so many things that a newspaper reporter doesn't know about, of course, that so you try to have a little background as well, right? And say, oh, well, this wasn't probably what he thought was really going on. And then a part of it, I have to say, is driven by images. And when I found an image that was really striking to me, I said, I'd like to get this in the game. Let's see how it works. So if you give me a few minutes, I'm sure I could think of somebody that I would have liked to have in the game that doesn't come to mind right now. But yeah, so what do you want to add to that, Damon?
I mean, I don't think I have anything to add. that pretty much says it all. The time constraints, the geographic constraints that Ted created to box the game do a real good job of focusing on the like the height of the civil rights movement. There's a lot of stuff that happens before, and honestly, there was a number of things that happened after those two bills are passed, but no game could ever, put all of it in and be financially viable. It's just it'd be too large, it'd be too unwieldy. It would require too huge of a time commitment to be able to find a price point by which somebody would be willing to buy the game. Although if there's anybody out there who wants to pay $500-600, contact us. We will make that game for you. It's those constraints obviously are going to eliminate a number of very worthy projects and a number of people whose work, whose passion and literal blood, sweat, and tears had a massive impact on, I mean, honestly, just me being able to sit here and talk to you today. They weren't excluded out of a belief in what they were doing wasn't important. It was just that the lines had to be drawn somewhere.
Well, we tried to be
great
representative, but there's no way you can be comprehensive. Yeah. And that's one of the things. I mean, I don't know how many hours I spent, basically 4 or 6 hours a day for a year and a half of reading. And it's amazing to me that you can stumble upon Black History Month. There'll be documentaries, and you would not have heard of the person or know anything about their story, and you realize that it's just an enormous subject. It's basically 5 years. There are 12 million Black people in the South, maybe 1 million or more either boycotted, marched, sat in, and we're talking about 150 people when you add up the local figures, leaders, and so on, that we could give some recognition to, So we have to say, of course, that these are merely representative of so many other people.
And it was really fun when I got signed on to the project, because I started talking to my parents, who were, both a part of the civil rights movement, on, the less important, more localized level. I mean, they both lived in California, so there were actions and there were projects and there were unfair laws and there were sundown towns, but none of that was to the level of what the South was going through. My dad during the civil rights movement was in the Air Force and was living and working and traveling through the Jim Crow South, and so he had some, I don't want to say amazing, because that's definitely way too positive connotations. He had some hair-raising stories about experiences that he had and people that he knew. And I talked to some other relatives, and I talked to some people who are friends and mentors of mine about their engagement with it. And the level of interest and excitement that they had, that, Ted had created a game that was fundamentally about the struggles that they went through, that it was the things that they lived and did during that time period. It meant a lot to them. And, I would have loved to be able to say, like, hey, here's a card that happens to have, hey, this one is about this person that I know. But like, it's not like that kind of thing. It is really, Ted called it right about like a sampling. These are representative, and the rule book discusses that. Like, there are so many projects and so many people involved at every level that the game could not properly give their time in the spotlight to. And this should really be thought of as a primer, something to get people to start thinking about this movement and how important and impactful it was to American history. And if we did our jobs right, somebody is going to decide that they want to spend just a little bit of time away from the game looking into this particular project or this particular person, on either side. Like, we name segregationists, we name judges and registers and sheriffs, we name city commissioners, the people who were actively working against the civil rights movement also. And
Klansmen too.
Oh,
Bobby
yeah.
Shelton is in there. Ken Adams is in there.
And we mark them as Klansmen.
Yeah.
So that, like, it's not a case of like, oh, this person, this concerned citizen did. No, that was not the case.
So that leads to one more, like, maybe more sensitive question, but then we're gonna go into the easy stuff, which is, we are now in an era where we are talking more, and as I think we should, about law enforcement and its role in oppression, as much as our hope that it would protect us. So law enforcement is represented in this game. Judges are represented in this game as oppositional figures. So did y'all work to be sensitive about that, or did you just go for it? Or how does protest, how does working against law enforcement look in this game?
Well, I don't want to put any police forces of the United States in 2022 in the same bag as Jim Clark and Bull Connor and Willis McCall and Zeke Matthews and the guys in our game who are, acting under the color of state law, but terrorizing people, essentially using burning down churches. Of course, Damon talked about the fire hoses, but not just that, attack dogs, tear gas, billy clubs, things like that. There were, not all sheriffs in the South were, police, committed police brutality by any means. The people that we selected are well documented in their tactics of using police brutality. And I would say we went for it. Part of the struggle, part of showing the heroism of the struggle is to show what they overcame. And I don't understand the idea of, not showing people being beaten. If you want to understand what it took for them to stand up, right? So there's nothing in the game that implicates the existence of law or law enforcement as a problem. It's just that these particular individuals were guilty of police brutality, and that was a big part of the story that we wanted to tell.
Yeah, and I think it's important for people to know and recognize that while we name names in the same way that we as players are not playing, John Lewis or Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King, like, we aren't playing those specific individuals. You are not actively fighting, this Klansman or that town sheriff or this city commissioner or the Loudness County registrar. You're not fighting those specific individuals. Those are people who are on projects who are working against you. But what you're doing is a much larger goal. Like, you are trying to reduce systemic racism. I shouldn't even say racism, systemic resistance to the civil rights process, the movement itself. So while the systemic resistance is your blue cubes, those blue cubes on any given project are not individuals. It's not like, this blue cube is this sheriff, this blue cube is the deputy. It is, against this project, there are 5 blue cubes. Against this project, there are 4 white cubes. Those 4 white cubes are not specific individuals who may have been Klan members or may have been part of just, a white unruly mob with Molotov cocktails, or, parents threatening the life of a small brown child. Like, the cube does not represent that. It is the resistance against that project socially. So you have that systemic resistance, you have that social resistance. We are not responsible for the actions and choices that those members of law enforcement made back then. So if they did a thing and it was noteworthy in regards to trying to halt a project, their name was on a card. From a either very noteworthy or from a leadership perspective, they were actively using their position to oppose equality, then their name is on a card. But the struggle that the 4 of us would be trying to do is not to kill a cube or hit anything like that. It's like, no, we are reducing this resistance. The game is still fundamentally a conflict simulation, but the way that it is abstracted out is more about the movement and organizations and trying to push towards a better and more equitable America, which nobody should have a problem with, right?
Indeed not. I am actually super excited to play this game. Damon, I'm hoping that since we live in the same city that I can get you a demo for me, actually. I'm really excited about this. This sounds great. But I have taken up much of your evening. So let's just get to the fun stuff, which, first of all, what have y'all been playing for fun recently, if anything?
I basically play Advanced Squad Leader, which is a tactical war game. And then I have a few games going on the internet, play by email of other war games. And that's about it. I'm not a smorgasbord or buffet gamer. I have my one game, and that's what I play.
There's definitely something to be said about being a lifestyle gamer. I've spent much of my time being that, like, this is my game and this is what I play. Here's my lane.
I can't remember all the rules to all these games.
There's so many games.
Too many. What were we thinking?
I don't know. Thinking that this is a game that needs to exist, that deserves to exist, and people should be playing it. As far as what I'm playing, I got a few months ago a large box about the size of a small toddler. I know because I had a small toddler next to it for comparison's sake. That is the Kickstarter for Nemesis Lockdown, and it is you were on you're on a spaceship out in space, and suddenly there are intruders that definitely don't resemble a non-IP specific movie set. But so these alien intruders are running around, and you're trying to accomplish a goal. And most that involves you surviving. So not all the goals are cooperative. Some of them are in direct conflict, and it always creates a very fun and intense moment as I worry that my wife is actually working against me.
And yeah, I've got to unpack on my game collection now. But I did just get Dune Imperium to play solo because I really enjoyed it at game night, and I've been playing a lot of Too Many Bones because that's just how I roll.
Nice.
And then where can y'all be found on the internet if you wish to be found?
Yeah, I don't have any social media, unfortunately. So
I am at ilogos, ILOGOS on Twitter.
Fantastic. And I, of course, can be found anywhere as Beyond Solitaire. So if you have questions about this episode, you can bother Damon or me, and we will try to get back to you. But gentlemen, I just want to thank you both so much for coming on. I really have appreciated getting to talk to you about this game. I'm super excited to see it on the table. And yeah, thanks y'all so much.
Thank you.
thank you.
All right, everybody out
Bye-bye.
there, please like, subscribe, comment, ask questions, and most of all, happy gaming.